Good afternoon. Welcome to our session on Dakhni Urdu, which is part of the series we're doing on the many language worlds of Karnataka. Our speakers today are Professor Meem Noon Saeed and Karthik Malli. Professor Meem Noon Saeed is an institution by himself in Bangalore. He was professor of Urdu at Bangalore University from 1985 to 2004, and he's the author and editor of 14 books, mainly on Dakhni. He graduated from the University of Mysore in 1969 and did his doctorate on Dakhni books attributed to Khwaja Banda Nawaz. Professor Saeed is a short story writer, researcher, editor, and translator. And he was the chairman of the Karnataka Urdu Academy from 2005 to 2008. And he's the director of the Dakhni Center for Studies and Research at present. Karthik Malli is an independent researcher and writer whose work focuses on the intersection of language, history, and identity in the Deccan and India's southwest coast. His writing has appeared in a number of publications. I'm sure many of you have come across them. A very rich body of work in the Deccan Herald, the Caravan, the Hindu, and the News Minute. Karthik is currently working on a book on the evolution of the Dakhni language, which is forthcoming from Westland Books in 2022. So welcome and thank you. The floor is yours, Karthik.
दखन मुल्क को अजब साज है कि सब मुल्क सर और दखन ताज है. This is a verse that was written over 300 years ago in Golconda, shortly after the founding of the city of Hyderabad. And it roughly translates to the Deccan has its own special essence. And, if the country's, if country's the head, then the Deccan is a crown above them all, right? And this was written in the Dakhni language, at the court of Golconda. And from this we see, from just a cursory glance, we see how proud and how much these poets identified with the Deccan, with the region they lived in, right? And it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Dakhni is a reflection of the Deccan and its history and its culture as well. Dakhni is very much a part of Karnataka's linguistic ecology, one of its many language worlds. And, in this series of sessions, as we explore how, Karnataka's identity is expressed through these different language worlds, Dakhni is one of the, it's among, one of its most important ones, because if you look at the census as well, Dakhni is the second most spoken language in Karnataka after Kannada. Of course, in the census, it's recorded as Urdu, but most Urdu speakers in the Deccan are speakers of Dakhni. Now, that brings us to the next point of contention. Dakhni has widely been seen as merely a dialect of Urdu, and in doing so, its independent traditions, its independent linguistic and historical evolution have been overshadowed, neglected, and by extension, all the wealth of contributions they have, they've offered to the region, are ignored as well. So to start off with, I think it's important to recognize that Dakhni Urdu is an independent linguistic form in itself, right? It has its own linguistic, features that are different from North Indian Urdu, and these are not mere quirks or curiosities, but these are linguistic features that come from the linguistic environment of the Deccan. Many of these, for example, including the characteristic Nako particle, come from Marathi, and other features come from deeper Dravidian influence in the same region, larger region. And this linguistic evolution points to the community's history as well as part of the Deccan, in the very heart of the Deccan. And in fact, for many centuries, when the Deccan Sultanates ruled over much of the Deccan, Golconda, Bijapur, they were the capitals of the two biggest Deccan Sultanates, and they were also by extension, some of the most prosperous cities in South Asia and in the world for that matter. These courts chose Dakni to express their local identity, to express, their own identity of being from the Deccan. And this is a heritage that has not been explored, unfortunately, for various reasons. But it's been my pleasure for a few years now to study and research the Dakni language, with the assistance of, experts in the field such as Professor Said himself, who I'm honored to share stage with today. And so the issue facing us is also that since Dakni has been neglected so much to the extent where its very status as a distinct linguistic entity is sometimes questioned, it becomes important that we look at it from a very critical lens, right? We move beyond rhetoric of emotions and like belongingness, and we apply a more critical, more analytical lens, right? So we take cues from history, from literary studies, from linguistics to actually analyze the language and not merely say that it's not merely speak of its emotional resonance, right? And of course, in doing so, is a mammoth task in and of itself, given like the academic work that would be needed, to sustain a project of this kind. But we have been fortunate that in the field of literary studies, numerous Urdu scholars have dedicated much of their career to studying Dakni and its independent literary tradition. And of course, Professor Said is, foremost amongst them, today. And yeah, I would like to, start by by just asking Professor Said about his own personal journey and how he, discovered classical Dakni literature.
Dakni is a very natural language for us, and like Malli has just remarked, the language that's spoken in Karnataka or even in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, though we call it Urdu, it's actually not Urdu. It is Dakni, which also refers to the place of where it is spoken, the Deccan. Actually, when I was studying for my PG courses, I came to know about the Dakkani literature and was astounded to find that there is almost 300 years of literature available in Dakkani, and which is not in common knowledge. So when I started studying Dakkani, then I came to know what masterpieces it has, but most of us do not know about it. The most interesting thing was, we were thinking that we are speaking a corrupt language, which is not Urdu. And when in the same language that is spoken in the bazaars and in wherever we have interactions with the people, the common language that is spoken in Karnataka, I was astounded to find that there is a vast literature, a treasure of literature in that. So from there, my interest grew and it has sustained ever since. That's one thing. And after that, I took it as a special study and have worked on this Dakkani literature for a very long time. I have edited many books, and I have been trying to promote this language, particularly removing misconceptions that it is a corrupt language. It has its own linguistic structure, a beautiful linguistic structure. No language is corrupt for that matter. Every language, or even a dialect has its own linguistic structure. Only thing is, how is it that we, misunderstand Dakhni or Urdu with each other? The fact is, Urdu, though it originated in and around Delhi, but it flourished in the Deccan. With the it was a period of a Sultanate period in the North India, and when a Bahmani kingdom was established in the south, the Urdu came with the Bahmani people. Perhaps you can recall that Muhammad bin Tughlaq had moved his capital from Delhi to Devgiri. At that time, he had ordered that not even a single person should remain in Delhi. So lakhs and lakhs of people, they migrated to Devgiri. Daulatabad, he called at that time. And these were the people who brought the language down to the south. As we all know, in the south, it is a Dravidian environment, and Urdu is an Indo-Aryan language. So it was very difficult for Urdu to, survive here. So it started taking from Gujarati, which is also an Indo-Aryan language, and from Marathi. So we find a lot of influence of these languages on the language that was brought from north to the south. And it was actually based on Khari Boli, and some Punjabi element was there, some Haryanvi element was there. But finally, it found its own identity here in the south. So it flourished for about 3 centuries with the Bahmani kingdom, the Adil Shahi kingdom, and the Qutub Shahi kingdom of Golconda and Adil Shahi of Bijapur. The sultans were the poets themselves, and they patronized the language to certain extent that thousands of books were written. Unfortunately, these thousands of books still remain in the archives or the museums in most of the, like Salarjung Museum and Idara Adbiyat-e Urdu and the Asafia Library in Hyderabad. But fortunately, most of the manuscripts, most of the masterpieces of this language have been published. And now it is fully acknowledged that Urdu, one moment. When Aurangzeb, he conquered the southern kingdoms of the sultanates, there was a barrier between the Mughal rule there and the southern rule. So the Deccani people had their own culture, and it was an indigenous culture. If we study the literature of those period, we find it is 100% Indian. In fact, the first book which was found in, which is a written record of the Dakhni, Kadamrao Padamrao, is wholly Indian. It's a story of a sage and a king. Then these people who were ruling the Deccan Sultans, they had completely, merged with the local culture. In fact, Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah, whose poetry collection is supposed to be the first collection in Dakhni, his mother was a Hindu, Bhagirthi, her name was, and he was brought under her guidance. So he had extreme, affinity towards the local culture. This we do not see in Urdu, which was more pronouncedly, influenced by the Persian culture in the north. So these 300 years of development of Dakhni ended with the Aurangzeb's attack. And when the barriers were opened, then from north and south, a lot of movement of the people was started. At that time, when Aurangzeb has attacked Deccan, there was no Urdu in the north. It was a spoken language. For all literary purposes, only Persian was used. And when the literature of South was gone, when it went to North, those people were surprised that in the language that they have relegated only to be a Boli, to only a dialect, such a vast literature could be written. So Urdu developed after in the early 18th century in the North, whereas it had a tradition of 300 years, Dakkani had a tradition of 300 years in the South. But then what happened was, when Urdu developed in the North, it was very easy for it to, to borrow and to influence other languages in the surroundings. So with the help of Persian, which was a very, very rich language, it slowly started growing. And what happened was that it subjugated the Dakkani, which was relegated to only a Boli or only to a dialect. It is a very peculiar situation that a language which has about 3 centuries of literature behind it is now only spoken and it is not written. And Urdu has been accepted as the standard language in even in the South.
Just to circle back a little bit from your narrative, we have seen how the origins of Dakkani came, even though they came from, as you rightly mentioned, from Tughlaq's invasion of the Deccan and his establishment of Daulatabad. Once it found itself rather in Daulatabad, it found itself amongst Marathi, primarily because this was a Marathi speaking region. But once it found itself in the Deccan, it started evolving independently.
Yeah.
It had its own evolution. It had its own linguistic evolution.
Exactly. You're right.
So in another, this is also important because it shows how these are, rather than Dakkani being an offshoot of Urdu, these are parallel, almost like, like sisters or like twins, even Siamese twins, if you will.
Yeah.
Just evolving in parallel.
Yes, you're right.
1 second.
So we have more elements of Marathi and Gujarati in the Dakkani than Urdu. For example, the word cha, which is used for emphasis, like anach, janach, karnach, etc. So this cha has come from the Marathi. And also for a negation, in Urdu we have mat or na or nahi and these words. But we have one word nakko, we don't want this. So this nakko is also a contribution of Marathi to Dakkani. And Gujarati's influence is also there, like ache, ahe, and these kinds of words. These words, they are strictly in Dakkani. They are not used in the standard Urdu that we follow these days.
So we see that Dakkani has low linguistic prestige today. And this is also a result of people not knowing about its independent history. And do you think that more awareness about this independent evolution and, about the classical literature will help to, offset the low prestige? Do you think it will help in that?
Could you be a little more specific?
Like if people know that what they speak actually has this long history, so then they would also feel like, they would give it more prestige. They would give it more respect.
Certainly, see, this awareness has to be brought, and we have been, working on it. Because, in the history of literature of Urdu, normally it starts from 1707 or something, because the writings originated only after the early 18th century in the North. Now there is a continuity of this language from South to the North. This has not always been acknowledged properly, and this portion of the history has been ignored. There is one difficulty also, because the Dakkani, that we are very familiar with this language. We can read and we can understand In fact, like Malik can show this Qutub Mushtari, it's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of Dakhni, which I have edited. And I have edited in such a form that the difficult pronunciations and all that has been made very easy to follow for the northern people. Otherwise, they are unable to read even the Dakhni. Meaning to say, we have to have some extra efforts in getting the people acknowledge that in this valuable literature is available here. Only it has to be decoded and it has to be properly interpreted so that they also start evaluating and appreciating this literature.
And I think, as we had spoken earlier, there's another one way to establish, the continuation of this Dakhni tradition is also to see how Dakhni literature it shows features of colloquial Dakhni of today.
Yes.
And how, even these poets writing, like 300 years ago and in Golconda and Bijapur, they used these Dakhni features like Nako and, Unech and, like these forms that people will immediately associate with the Deccan.
Yeah.
And these are not just things that have come up in the last, like 1 or 2 centuries, but these are linguistic features that were present at the, from the very beginning, so to speak.
Right.
And so, do you think you'd maybe have some examples of this from classical literature, like some of these?
I think I have some, a few references are brought only. See, as I mentioned earlier, the cultural aspect of Dakhni is wholly and purely Indian. Mostly Urdu language is associated with Muslims, that it is a Muslim language brought by Muslims, or the invaders brought it with themselves. But the most, paradoxical aspect is in the whole world, Urdu is not spoken anywhere in any Muslim country other than India. So if Muslims had brought it, it should have been in some other country, Urdu would have been spoken there. Nowhere. It originated in India and it has that indigenous character. I'll show you in a Masnavi called Qutub Mushtari, which I just showed you. Even in the literature, the poets and the writers have not only acknowledged, but they have accepted the local culture. And it has been reflected in the literature. For example, for invocation, what we do is, in Urdu, we say, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I begin in the name of God, who is merciful and beneficent. But Wajhi says, when he commences his poem, not only Wajhi, but Bijapur's both kings, Ibrahim Adil Shah and Ali Adil Shah, both these kings, when they were the poets themselves, they start praising Ganapati and Saraswati and all that. And here is something to note: Chupi raat ujala hua dees ka. And the night is gone and the day has dawned. Lagya jag karan siv parmes ka. So the world, when in the morning, they started the day with praising Shiv Parameshwar. So this is how it begins. And for the love songs also, in Urdu, it is always from the male point of view. But the Indian tradition is that it is from female point of view that the love is expressed. You find the same thing in Dakhni literature. I'll just quote 2 verses. Na puchu behman jotsi kab milna pusu hoisi, gham birha sab mein soisi na jane dukhyu koe kar. She says, I want to consult the Brahmin Jyotishi to find out when are my days of separation will be over, when my beloved is likely to come. Then, तू अपने को टुक आज मैं निज सपने देखी सोए कर, जब प्यू चला सट सीज मुझ तब सोती उठी रोए कर. प्यू अपने को टुक आज में. I have seen my beloved in my dream today, and I was very happy. But when I awoke, I was alone, so I awoke crying myself. Look at the language, which is at a large variance with the Urdu language. Similarly, one king, Ali Adil Shah Shahi, who was the Bijapur's Sultan, he has written a book called Nauras. All the 9 rasas he has explained in his book, and he says, he begins his poems collection this way: Le Shubh Naam Sri Saraswati ko tab payo jis Nauras Sarasang, Ibrahim karat kahat dandot karat tab hot rom rom bhev ang. Which means, I begin with the name of Saraswati, and whose blessings I want, and also Ibrahim, pays his respects to her, then only I'll be able to write my poetry. Again he says, Sarasti Soch Sundari, Maha Uttam Jat Nirmal, Yakhast Pustak, Duje Pandri, Samran Teje Shank. So like this, the entire collection of Sultan Ali Adil Shah has all these references.
It's interesting you've ended with Ibrahim Adil Shah II.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of this anecdote where the Mughal, I think it was Akbar at the time, Mughal king had sent an ambassador to Bijapur, and at the time it was, the norm was that sultans would speak in Persian, but when the ambassador goes to Bijapur, he speaks to him in Persian. But Ibrahim Adil Shah, who's the Sultan of Bijapur, he speaks to his interpreter in Marathi because he doesn't know Persian well. He was more comfortable in Marathi.
Exactly.
He spoke to him in Marathi, who, in fact, he spoke to, I think it was a Marathi Brahmin, who then translated it into Persian for the Mughal ambassador. So, it's funny because in looking at Deccan history and looking at Dakni literature, we see like many of these examples and they're not merely scattered examples. These are these aren't just curiosities. These show that our conception of the Deccan itself is based on we are trying to fit it into some into a model that doesn't belong to it. So, we have a lot of these cross-cultural, I wouldn't even say cross-cultural, it's more of a Deccan identity that, they represent. And that brings us, to the next point, apart from its considerable literary merit, it becomes very clear that classical Dakni literature is also a very important source of history.
Right.
And many of these rulers, especially of Bijapur, they commissioned works of history in Dakni,
Right.
which are like valuable primary sources for historians even today. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. See, the Deccan Sultans mostly made it a practice, rather a tradition, that whenever they went to wars, they used to, their court poets used to accompany them. And Sultan had the orders to completely record all events of the war. So this Ali Nama is one such Masnavi, a very long poem, in which the poet Nusrati has recorded all the events of a war. And surprisingly, most historians of Deccan refer his Masnavi, which is a work of fiction rather, for authenticity of the events that took place in the war. Similarly, in Tipu Sultan's period, his court poet was Hassan Ali Izzat. There was a war with the Nizams and the Marathas in the Tungbandra region. He took the poet with him and asked him to, completely record all the events of the history, and they also 100%, they are authenticated by the historians. Not only this, many cultural issues. For example, in Sultan's, Tipu Sultan's he had ordered Hasan Ali Izzat, the court poet, to compose poems which were sung for the military, to keep them in, good humor, not only good humor, but keep them in a prepared situation anywhere. This is the first kind of literature that we come across. And he had also, he has also mentioned in which particular time, which particular song has to be sung and accompanied with instruments and all that. So keep them ready. In those poems, we see that there are definite references to the British, their generals and their warriors and other people. And by mentioning them and mentioning their vanquishment, the soldiers, their feelings would be, pepped up for the next attack or some attack, or even defend, or similar war situations. So even Dakhani is not just, a collection of only love poems or even sophistic or religious culture. It has a very important aspect of historicity also. Historical events have been recorded in that. And as I have already told you, they have been authenticated by historians themselves for writing history. This is one of the very distinct aspect of Dakhni literature.
So speaking of using Dakhni literature as sources, it's also, it's very interesting to us, those of us who research Deccan history, that, Dakhni literature is, classical Dakhni literature is very patriotic, but also at the time, the Deccan sultanates were under threat by the Mughals, right? And, of course, in a lot of modern thinking, people would assume, okay, like since they were of the same religion, that they would be welcomed or something. But if you read Dakhni, literature, you see that, these poets, these courts, they hated the Mughals and they considered them like filthy North Indians who were coming into the Deccan. They would say that they were Deccanese, they were of the Deccan. And these people are coming from Delhi, so it's a very regional sentiment rather than like religious or anything. And it's interesting also because there are many references to local, local life, local culture and local identity, where this is not even the very name Dakhni is, it means of the Deccan, and it only appears after that the name only becomes popular in Dakhni poetry after the Mughals start moving south, right? And you even have verses by these Bijapuri poets saying things like, the Mughals are like the spawn of Satan and stuff like that. These are actual verses, by the way. So you have these condemnations of Mughal force, of North Indian force, right? They're seen as invaders into the Deccan, into South India. So it's a very regional sentiment. It's really interesting to read about. I think we'll open the floor to questions for both Professor Syed and
Yeah, you said there's Deccani literature. In what script was it written? Because you say it's before Urdu came in. So what script was used to write this?
It was the same script in which Urdu is written now.
Okay.
Same script.
Same script.
Yeah.
I have two questions. One is, how is the geography of the Nizam's Hyderabad state? Is it co-terminus with the spoken Dakhani language? Does it coincide? And number two is, from the west coast, the Arabian influences were coming into India. So how far they also penetrated and affected this Dakhani culture and tradition?
What's your first question, sir?
The Nizam's Hyderabad state,
Yeah.
is it, does that represent the Dakhani area? Or geographically there's something less or something more? Does it coincide with this Dakhani thing?
No, you mean to say that
the state of Hyderabad,
State of
which
Hyderabad.
included Maharashtra, Karnataka,
yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
Was that a representative region for speaking Dakkani? Or there were other areas outside of it which also?
Acha. No, I think in the Nizam's domain, Dakkani was yes, it was spoken in the same area, not beyond that. And by the time the Nizam's rule was fully established in Hyderabad, Urdu had started influencing Dakkani. Dakkani remained up to, I'll tell you, as I told you, at the time of when Aurangzeb decimated the Sultan's kingdoms, almost Dakkani came to an end in its written form. It was only a continuity of the spoken Dakkani that continued for a very long time. But slowly, as the Bahmani kingdoms and the Deccan Sultans made it a point that they will have their own culture and they are not going to copy the culture of the North. So until these kingdoms were there was sort of a barrier where, people did not move from the south to the north or not to the south. Only after the Mughal attack, the barriers were opened, isn't it? So these people insisted that they will have indigenous culture. It's not a imported culture or something. That was retained until the end.
And just to add on to what the professor said, the Nizams were not actually patrons of Dakkani at all. They only patronized North Indian Urdu. So Dakkani, in a way, actually suffered under them, you could say. And in fact, Professor Syed himself has, told me that it's also would be accurate to say that in Karnataka, it's had a longer and less interrupted tradition because it was not ruled by the Nizams, places like Bangalore or Mysore. And I mean, it's spoken outside of what Hyderabad state was. For example, even Bangalore, for that matter, if you go to Fraser Town, or if you go to places like Hassan or Chikmagalur, so it was not co-terminus with the Nizam's realm. It predated him, and the Nizam himself, I mean, his state, they were not patrons of Dakkani at all. Yeah. They were Deccan, so they were set up by the Mughals. They were North Indians were placed in the Deccan. So they patronized North Indian culture. Yeah.
Early on, you were saying that Dakkani was looked down upon, but even today in Hyderabad, and I'm talking about Hyderabad, the city and the immediate surroundings, Dakkani in many communities, not only Muslim communities, but also Hindu, is looked upon as a cultural concept which is highly rated. It is not looked down upon. And to continue what you were saying, the Nizam, the first Nizam was a viceroy of Aurangzeb. So naturally, he was going to represent Aurangzeb's interests, not that of the local people. Would you agree with that? I'm talking about the status of the language.
Exactly. I fully agree with you. See, Dakkani has its importance only from the point of view of literature, because Dakkani is now a spoken language. It is not being written. So from the point of view of literature, Dakkani is looked down upon. Otherwise not. It is a living language. It is a living language which almost comprises, it's sort of a lingua franca in the south.
I have a question. Bangalore Dakkani, could you say a bit about it? The variation that we have in Bangalore, quite unique to our parts of town, this side of Bangalore.
Yeah, sure. Every place has its features. They say that the language changes every 50 kilometers. The language changes. In Kannada also, you find the Mangalore Kannada and the North Kannada and the Bangalore Kannada. Mysore Kannada is supposed to be the most chaste, isn't it? So this kind of, but there are very minor kind of features that we see in the because of the local culture, local geographical conditions, with movement among the local communities, this change comes up. But that's not very pronounced, rather.
I just like to add one, one point. It's not, it's not like entirely related, but like this also brings us to the theme of the discussion, the language worlds of Karnataka, and like Dakni has been, as an integral part of the linguistic ecology of Karnataka. It's also influenced Kannada dialects, right? Beyond like outside of Dakni, it's also influenced Kannada dialects, where Kannada dialects, especially in the north, have been they've incorporated words from Dakni, and I've even read that in places like Bidar, a lot of the numbers, a lot of the counting is also done, it's done in Dakni, and like many words have been accepted as part of these Kannada dialects. So it doesn't exist in its own world, is the point I would like to make. It's very much part of this ecology that includes other languages as well. Yeah, it's in fact, speaking of Frasertown, it's even influenced like the Frasertown Tamil to some extent. So yeah.
I had a question. You draw a distinction between the Mughals and the Deccan Sultans, right? And I'm just curious to know, like, where did the Deccan Sultans come from? Like, what was different about them from the Mughals?
Acha, see, Deccan Sultan means, how these kingdoms in the south were established was because of the attack from the northern, the Delhi Sultan, they attacked the south. And for some time, these were the subsidiaries of the North Indian Sultans. Later on, they cut off themselves completely, culturally and militarily, for everything they cut off themselves. And they established, starting from the Bahmani kingdom, Adil Shah and Qutub Shah, they established their own kingdoms. So that is how differentiate between the northern sultans and the southern sultans.
Thank you so much for this kind of
very
wonderful
much, sir.
perspective on this language, which has such regional flavor, as you have pointed out, but also it's some of its history and 300 years of literature, which most people don't know about. Thank you so much, Professor Saeed and Karthik Malli. Thank you.